Today is July 3rd. We are 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. We are now 2 hours later due to a voting to hopefully see if we can get some more community activity, giving a little bit more uh, better consensus time for people to meet. So yeah, I think some good things happened this last week. To get a hold of Garrett and kind of asked him if they had a GitHub, and he said they had not really set up a GitHub yet, but they have all the code and everything that, if someone can create that GitHub, he can have his Tangle team, and we can get that set up as an open source GitHub. So I believe it was JIGL offered to create this sort of GitHub for that, which he started already. And then I think it'd just be good to get a few community members to have more than one redundancy, and so it's not necessarily centralized, to have kind of ownership access. And then probably get a few other people that have, real technical background to ensure that once that code is in there, that they're, I'm not a tech guy myself, but I know that there's ways to secure it that, basically it's a 3 signer for any code edits to be approved, for anything to be deleted, etc. I think there's a certain structure and guidelines in which, if we want to have an open source code base where we don't want people to just go in and be able to change the code at will, because they could put a vulnerability in there, but that they can propose code changes, and then the community with designated individuals can, basically look and approve that code and integrate that code. So that's good to just kind of see that first step. I think that's a pretty big step to get this GitHub created. Once we get the code in there, then we can really start activating the technical capabilities within the community. I also went and last night just created a basic Gnosis wallet. I talked to Garrett about that, saying, he went on a work vacation, but given he resides in China, I always get nervous when you don't hear from someone that's in China for over a week, because it certainly happened before where people go for long government vacations. But I think it just goes to show that I don't know, I didn't really ask. I don't know who has access to the token supply, the 80% or all the tokens, the community tokens. But I think, always putting them in a multi-sig is a good option. I believe the community voted on 5 signers, which we would do a 3 of 5. We wouldn't want a 5 of 5, because then if someone, God forbid, died in a plane crash, then your tokens would be locked. So you always want more signers than kind of you're requiring. I think a 5 of 8 is, for the main chunk of tokens, is not a bad thing. But in the beginning, when we have limited people, as well as probably more payouts on a regular basis, even with a 3 of 5, sometimes it takes a while to get those 3 signers, because different time zones, everyone's got things going on. So it could take a couple days to, sign and make sort of incentive payments out. So I'm just the first signer on here, and I wrote it down somewhere, but like, Edward, if you'd want to be a signer, kind of give you a little experience in doing multi-sig transactions, stuff like that. I actually tried my my ledger, and I don't know why. I might need to update it, but it was not processing transactions. I haven't used my ledger for a while. So I just use my standard MetaMask address, but the best practice is always that we use a ledger, that everyone that's a signer on this multi-sig would use a ledger. And once I get mine, then I'll switch my address to the ledger. And, we can all kind of learn this together and help each other. But yeah, so you definitely want a ledger. You want a MetaMask address that you need to be able to use your ledger to sign that transaction. And then once we get 5 signers, basically we'll come into the settings and we'll click a 3 out of 5 signature, and then any of us really, but it could be designated people, can basically propose a transaction, and then of course we need 3 signers to process that transaction. So Saphira, I was just going over kind of I set this up. My ledger isn't working. I think I have to update the firmware. So I just set it up on my regular MetaMask, but started this, and then we can kind of get people in. We could run a couple test transactions when we all feel comfortable. Then we can take the 80% TAN tokens, and then we have redundancy. JIGL set up the GitHub, which I think is great. And I was just basically saying that I'm pretty sure that there's a sort of guidelines and structured setup in which an open source GitHub, so that basically no single person can go in and change the code. You also need basically 3 approvers, 3 different owners, etc., or 5, however we decide. So no one could just basically delete it and screw everything up. So again, giving that protection or redundancy. Going over the last vote we did in the last week, which we were very split down the middle with different incentive locking periods from an instant to basically 24 months. The 2 real, split, I think one was 15 and one was 14, was the instant and 12 months. So we as a group decided to redo this vote and just have those 2 options. And it came back 20 votes for 12 months, 13 votes for instant. I can't remember that type of voting. There's a type of voting that's even, I think they do in New York and Seattle here, where you do these sort of rounds and, work to get it. I'll have to look it up because it was an interesting way of voting. But, there was a comment. Sorry, go ahead. There was a comment in the general channel, I believe. And again, I think just to reiterate for anyone watching, 4 meetings ago or 5 meetings ago, we really had a discussion about, do we want to take a really long time and have a perfected governance, 20-page structure where, we have all the majorities and consensus and delineated? Or do we want to instead understand that we're going to kind of have a loose governance structure, but a fair governance structure as best we can, but be much more quicker? And then that doesn't mean that it's set in stone. It just means let's get the network going, let's get incentives going, and then we can build that real structured governance. So, part of that was basically the people that show up in the meetings ultimately make the decision at the end of the day because they're the active ones. But we always want to be seeking the community's voices, their opinions, and trying to reach community consensus. So I think we did a good role here, and it would be up to us if we want to say, hey, let's go with 12 months. That seems to be the consensus of the community. Again, I like when these things are split and it takes time of us as a group to not rush and also try to listen to the community. But does anyone kind of vote against setting a 12-month term for incentives? I'm just going to wait because Saphir is typing.
Oh, no, I just outlined the voting system name.
Oh, yeah, instant runoff voting. Yeah. Nice. Okay, so no one objects to the 12 months, which I think is good. And, it's going to be the least risky option to give TAN token a chance to become valuable, which in turns allows for the community to maintain, build, and continue growth of the network. So I will just put to accept the community consensus on 12 months. Okay. 12 months. And just to reiterate, this is like these incentives from the 80% is essentially what we're going to use to pay for any work done by any community member, which includes the lead position, building the governance, building GitHubs, building whatever. to get this thing off the ground, to get it going. As the same thing for, giving incentives for if anyone has a dApp that wants to bring it into the ecosystem, because there are dApps out there in Shimmer, we can give these incentives for that. And luckily then, since there's already dApps kind of built, there isn't a lot of time that needs to go into essentially rebuilding them. But also, if there's individuals out there that want to build something from the scratch, ground up, to port into the TAN ecosystem, then we can certainly provide those incentives. On that, over the last week, we got some discussion going in the incentive channel. I did a quick breakdown based on, Bill Poster kind of giving the breakdown, giving address links to where the TAN tokens are on the BSC network. And I kind of did 3 scenarios on a 4-year term. Now, if just to reiterate to those watching, we did do some community votes, as in if we should do essentially a 2-year term, 4-year term, 5-year term, 10-year term of how long do we want these 80% of tokens to essentially give us a runway. And, long story short, you could shoot for 10 years, but then you're going to have less incentives at the beginning. You could go really short and drop all those tokens, but if you have the chance of running out of money. So kind of the community, I personally was on the 5-year, but the community supported 4 years, which I don't think is bad in the sense of, hey, if this thing doesn't take off after 4 years, then, we'll probably know in the first 2 years if this thing's going to take off. But breaking the 4 years down into 3 is sort of, we could front load. We could have done it very evenly. So let's just say 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%. But in one of the meetings, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, we stated, hey, maybe it's better to front load the first year because that's going to be where a lot of effort's going to be needed to taken from the community. We should have more tokens at that time to really get the momentum going, to get the ball rolling, to get things kicked off, as well as the price increases, as the network growth, you're not going to need to use as large a percentage, right? And another thing I want to reiterate too is, kind of something that I always looked at in the Tangle Treasury is just because you're allocated something, you don't have to use all that funds or all those tokens. We see this in corporate a lot of times. They'll give out to a department or a global region, hey, you're allocated this much. And if you don't use that money, then they won't get as much the next year. So a lot of these times, those segments of the corporation are just trying to spend those budgets just so they could say, oh, we need more for next year. But, again, we don't have to follow these corporate standards. And I think it would be better to see that, hey, we reached our goals, our yearly goals without even using the total allotted. And now we have some for next year. So we have options at the end of the day. So the 3 scenarios are in the incentive channel. I wonder if I can bring this. Okay. So 800,000 over 4 years. I did a low end 35%, 25%, 2020, 40%, 25%, 20%, 15%, and then 50%, 25%, 15%, 10%. So 3 scenarios of how much do we want to front load in year 1, and then how does that look at the later years. And I would say the consensus from that really was go the middle route at 40% with a 25, 20, 15%, or Bill Poster liked the middle route, but maybe doing it 40, 30, 20, 10. And then, yep, Edward, just reading here, likes the 40, 30, 20, 10.